Okay, so the last video was early June, so that puts me at overdue by about 2 weeks. So I wanted to bring you guys up to speed on some of the stuff we've been working on, and one of those things is actually a cluster of several interrelated things. So I'll dive in and kind of talk my way through it. So this is one of Ashley's latest concepts. This is the crew lounge and mess hall. And first of all, very cool. This is, the type of environment I was hoping to see in the game, vaguely reminiscent of Firefly, and even to a degree like The Expanse or Star Wars' Millennium Falcon. There's living going on this ship. People have ways of entertaining themselves, ways of feeding themselves, as well as ways of conducting operations and managing the ship. And this was based on a concept that Emily Sue did a while back, which was her rendition of how the game could look in a top-down pixel art style. So you can see a lot of the same sort of stylistic elements in this image as you do here, like the color palette, the existence of very traditional chairs and tables and even some household items. And one of the things that raises as a question is, well, how are all of these things staying put on the ground? Do we have artificial gravity or something else going on? And to answer that question, no, there is no artificial gravity in Ostranauts. The game is trying to adhere fairly strictly to hard science. There are a few exceptions, but in the case of gravity, the game assumes that ships like this are constantly under thrust, and the thruster is below the deck. So in this picture, I've tried to illustrate what that means using some terminology that I borrowed from Project Rho. That's projectrho.com. If you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely check it out. It's a very cool science fiction sort of resource. Anyway, in it they use the terminology tail sitter for something which is reminiscent of our mid-20th century science fiction rocket. The thruster's at the bottom, the nose cone's at the top, we have some lander legs or fins or something on the bottom, and the assumption in this is that most of the crew stuff is up here, and then most of the mechanical workings and so on are down here. Contrast that with a belly lander, which I've sort of drawn a side view of a space shuttle here. So we have the thruster on the tail end, we have the cockpit nose up here, and then we have some landing apparatus down here, tail fin there. And what that ends up doing is it sort of splits the direction that down points depending on how this vehicle is moving. So in a rocket like this, the thruster's in the back, it lands on its back, so no matter what, whether you're landing or under thrust, down is the same direction. I drew these people here for reference. They're terrible people, but they're not terrible people, I'm sure they're great, but they are terrible renderings of people. So their feet are pointed down at all times on this tail sitter. With a belly lander, the deck is designed to be functional when you're landing, when you're on a gravity surface. But while you're in transit, while this thruster is underway, down is pointing towards the back of the ship, and you'd have to be strapped in or standing on a wall in order to avoid getting hurt. So this presents some complications. However, almost all of our favorite ships from science fiction are belly lander by design. They're sort of a long flat or long and wide flat layout, like the Millennium Falcon, like Firefly. They are basically a low wide building with a thruster on one wall on the exterior. And if you don't have artificial gravity, that presents a problem. So in Ostranauts, there's a little bit of trickery going on, and I've tried to draw that here. The Ostranauts ship design is technically a tail sitter. The thruster is on the bottom of the ship. It has some landing apparatus down there. However, the top of the ship, the nose cone in this tail sitter, is more like what a belly lander looks like. It's a very sort of wide floor plan. And the reason for that is the aforementioned traveling and landing direction, gravity is consistent, but also it allows us to do our Firefly-like or Millennium Falcon-like spaceship layouts. And because we never see what's below the deck because of the top-down perspective here, for example, we don't know how deep that is. If you're a science nerd, you can pretend it's as long as is necessary to hide all the equipment below the decks. Or if you don't really care about that and you just want to pretend you're in your favorite science fiction ship, you could sandwich this as tightly as you want and pretend there's nothing below decks. So there's a bit of trickery there in how it's presented. And I will go over here to kind of demonstrate how that is applicable. So one of the things I did recently was to redesign the way these fuel and propellant canisters are designed. So I'm going to go up here to grab another one. So these guys, they have a footprint, which is this red area, but it's all below decks. So you can see I'm kind of blocked from putting it in between these two because each of those two extends beyond their little colored box below decks. This would bump into those guys if I placed it here. And the nice thing about that is we still have some visual representation in our deck plan and a way of accessing this without having to go below decks. But scientifically, we can pretend everything's taken care of because below decks it's even bigger, and if you want to say it extends way, way down, like in a skyscraper or something, you can do that, and it doesn't really upset the visual style we have going on here. Similarly, the reactor, like we have a little bit of the reactor peeking out above the deck, enough for us to access important pieces, let's say, but the actual business end of that reactor and thruster is all below decks. Previously, this is what a propellant and fuel canister looked like. I'm going to zoom out to kind of give you a little bit more of a perspective. They're gigantic. And this ship almost had to be double or 2.5 times its current size just to accommodate 4 of these, which is enough to go from one planet to another. Scientifically accurate, but not great for storytelling and for game performance. What we'd really like is the benefit of having these giant canisters without the drawback of having to walk around them to get to something else in the ship. Plus it sort of imbalances the way the ship would perform. So these guys are sort of the current solution to that problem. They're still technically there. They're the same diameter under decks as these guys are. They just extend down through the deck rather than across the deck. So one of the other things I wanted to show off was additional install and uninstall stuff you can do on a ship, as well as some new art that we've integrated for the ship. So previously you could uninstall floor panels, conduits, and walls, and they were kind of test cases for rearranging core ship pieces. But since then, I've basically converted everything else to something you can uninstall and then reinstall elsewhere. So you could technically dismantle an entire ship and then rebuild it piece by piece. So I'll walk around and show off a little bit of that. It also gives me a chance to show off some of the new art styles that we've been experimenting with. Some slightly less busy looking floor tiles. You can see the new airlocks have a little bit more detail on them, plus the little caution stripes. And I think what I'll do first is take off that outfit so I can put on my EVA, which isn't strictly necessary here, but if I screw up and punch a hole in the ship, at least then I'll have an EVA suit on. And then I'm going to grab these tools just to kind of enable uninstallation. So got my tools, and yeah, I could just go over here and say door uninstall. And what you're going to see when these uninstall is they go into like a loose version. So here it says item door unclosed loose. So this is the same object, just sort of wrapped in this sort of faux crate, like a cardboard or wooden crate with a window on the top. And that's just right now kind of a visual shorthand for this thing has been uninstalled and it's just sitting there on the floor, crated up and ready to go. You can do the same thing to this heater. And for the moment, you can basically just pick these up and put them in your pocket, which is unrealistic, but let's see, undo this, install. But at least it lets you kind of transport items around and reinstall them elsewhere. And in fact, maybe that's what I'll do with this guy. So this loose heater, I'll install and put you on this side of the room instead. Like that. And what are you up to right now? Looking for food. So yeah, this basically lets you go into a derelict, take anything you want out of it, transport it to your main ship, and then reinstall it there. And I can do bedrolls too, because these are one of the few things that don't get crated. This is me experimenting with rolling up a bedroll instead of uninstalling it with a drill. So yeah, it's still a work in progress, but at least now, like I said, technically you could do an entire ship this way. And kind of what's next along those lines is having some menus down here for uninstalling and reinstalling en masse. So if you wanted to paint like a row of uninstalls here so that it just rips up the entire floor across this room, and then go down here and then paint a row of installs, it'll just sequentially go through those jobs, similar to what you would see in Dwarf Fortress or RimWorld. But the idea being you've eventually got a crew working for you, and you can just kind of part out the ship or set up a series of jobs in a queue so that one ship gets dismantled efficiently, and then you can salvage what you want from that and use it on your own ship. Thing that I wanted to talk about today was the stuff that Mike's been working on. Michael has been working on the social combat UI, which is basically what we've been talking about as a way to deal with social conflict, but also just general negotiations, discussions, interactive situations between characters. So what I'm going to do is take Josiah over here to talk to Desmond, and we'll use our debug command to open up the UI. And you can see it sort of does this neat letterbox effect, zooms in on the action, and then we see us and the person we're talking to here, a list of options available to us down here, a little log, message log here, and then potentially some consequences of the action that we're about to do shown to us here. Anyone who's played Neo Scavenger is going to recognize a lot in common with Neo Scavenger's encounter system, and to a degree the battle system. The UI was a similar kind of setup of here's everything you can do, here's some information about the person you're talking to or dealing with, and then here's kind of the results based on what you chose. So the main idea here is one part sort of getting information about the person you're talking to, and then the other part choosing an appropriate action to basically move the negotiation or the discussion in the direction you're hoping to go, whether it's ordering them to follow your command, or if it's questioning an NPC, or even just scolding somebody who violated your orders. And initially, when you come in cold, you don't know a lot about the person you're talking to, other than just looking at their face. She looks a little bit upset or concerned, so we can kind of gauge that she's in a bad mood. But we might use, for example, small talk, just chit-chatting to kind of find out a little bit more about what's on her mind. She might reveal that something specific's on her mind, or maybe she's just hangry, she hasn't had a meal when she was supposed to, and maybe she's been overworked. Like she needs somebody to kind of relieve her from working too many hours. Whatever the case is, there are sort of strategic steps you can take to kind of reveal that information, so you don't just blindly blurt something out and then have it shot down. And then, assuming you find the information you're looking for during that discussion, you may then use different tools to kind of manipulate that person. Whether it's bolstering their ego if they feel like they've been insulted somehow, or if they are refusing to give you information because they don't trust you. Maybe one of your historical actions you've taken is an option here that gains them that trust, or maybe you just have to bribe them. One or the other. There's a choice that you can use to get the outcome that you want. And right now, the one that he has set up as a test example is demand. You demand some random objective, and then we say, yes, let's do that. We demand our test objective, and Desmond accepts. And then the next turn, quote-unquote, starts. And right now, the game is paused. We're animating, but nobody's going anywhere or doing anything. And I think that's probably going to be the way of things moving forward. So when you're in a situation like this, I don't think players would prefer the ship continue to do whatever it's doing in the background, because you'll want time to take your time and consider your actions here. And speaking of, this may end up expanding to include more than just social interactions. Like I would like for this to be able to handle physical interactions, whether it's like taking a swing at somebody, starting a fist fight, or maybe even handling long-range combat. Because again, this is the basis for Neo Scavenger's battle system. We were able to do anything in Neo Scavenger's battle system with just these few UI elements. Except in this case, we would actually be able to see the 2D layout of the situation, who's standing where, what are the things in the room, rather than Neo Scavenger's just sort of abstract range. So I think there's a lot of potential here for this to be kind of an interesting game of its own, like, sort of stepping stones while negotiating with a person. And hopefully also a useful tool for enabling you as a captain to do things on your ship with your crew. The things I wanted to talk about before rounding out the video was the room effects that I've been working on, and some of the health effects. So up until now, we've been able to interact directly with objects and interact directly with people. But there's really no concept of interacting with a room. And where that starts to get interesting is the idea of things like privacy, or like if there's a smell in the room, or if this room makes you feel tense because of stuff going on in there. There's definitely some effects that we want people to experience because of what's going on in a room, and not necessarily just because of whatever item they're interacting with at the time. So what I'll do to kind of illustrate one of these is spawn a few more people. They're all just kind of walking around the ship right now. But one thing we can do now is we can tell the AI, if you want privacy, go to a room with nobody in it. And if I click on this area, there's a person in this room, so I can either walk there, talk to this person, or interact with the floor. But at this room, which has no one in it, I can right-click on it, and the room has a look for privacy option. So now, not only can I do that, but the AI can say, well, if I need privacy, I just need to find a room that has that population 0 stat or attribute, and then I'll go to that room, and then I can spend some time there and recover some privacy. Similarly, if a room was making you feel tense, or let's say a room was on fire, there's a fire in this room, I need to get to a room that does not have fire in it. the game can attach those attributes to the rooms, and then the AI can key off of those and make decisions accordingly. I think that'll be a pretty useful thing in giving the ship a sense of place and the AI a sense of smart agency to seem like it's knowing what it's doing. I'll be building on that over time, adding more and more awareness and attributes. And one of the last things I wanted to talk about was the medical simulation stuff. So in Neo Scavenger, there was actually a pretty robust health and medical simulation going on. Players of that game will remember you could get something like, you could eat tainted food, which would give you gastroenteritis, which would cause nausea, vomiting, potentially diarrhea. Those would in turn cause your level of comfort to go down. They would cause your level of hydration to go down. Basically there's sort of a chain of events that happens when you get sick, or if you have any other medical condition when you're bleeding. You start to lose blood pressure, and that has effects on either your consciousness or your hydration levels and your ability to do things. So simulating that in a very detailed and interesting way was something that I still wanted to have in Ostranauts, and I pulled over as much as I could, plus some new stuff, things like radiation and hygiene and a couple other things. But maybe to kind of show one of the examples, what I'll do is I'll walk down here, and we have some heating ventilation type stuff over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cooler and I'm going to turn it off. I can't get there. I'm going to try walking down there. There we go. So I'm going to turn the cooler off, and then I'm going to switch the heater to, still not able to get right in front of it. So, heater, control, there we go. I'm going to switch the heater so it's always on regardless of the thermostat, which it's hooked up to, and we already see the thermostat's triggering into the red territory. So the room is heating up now. And if we wait long enough, we'll start feeling the effects of that. And so what I'll do is I'll select Bonne Chance and maybe fast forward a little bit. So now you can see time is moving a little. Took a nap. Okay, so that'll make it easy to stay focused on him. So time is passing, and we've started sweating because we're overheating. Oh, it must be getting hot fast. Yeah, it's already almost 400k in here. And we're dead. Okay, so let me pause it there. So this is a pretty short and sweet description, chain of events. We start to sweat, and both in Neo Scavenger and in Ostranauts, sweating will actually increase your range of comfortable temperatures because the sweat evaporates, which cools your body. And that helps a little bit, and in most situations will kind of help your body restore its core temperature. However, because we've got the heat cranked, it's already 424 Kelvin, which is, God, it's like 130 Celsius. Anyway, it's very hot, like oven hot in here. So as we passed through sweating, that wasn't doing it. The temperature kept going up, and then we started suffering heat exhaustion, and then we started suffering heat stroke. And that comes with clumsiness and feeling dizzy. I don't think intimacy was related there. I think that was just coincidence. And then finally, our body just can't cope with it anymore. Our organs fail, and we die of heat stroke. So a similar thing happens when the room gets too cold. You start to go into hypothermia and then eventually freeze to death. If you dehydrate, you start to get headaches. You start to lose the ability to do things, to focus. if you don't stay well fed, you start to have issues with weakness or even loss of consciousness. And similarly, like, you might get a pathogen which causes vomiting and nausea, and you may not be able to hold down food anymore. You'll just be puking it up whenever you try and eat. Or maybe the pathogen is causing you to sweat, and that is causing you to require external ways of managing your temperature. So it's a deep system, and it provides a lot of sort of footholds and handholds for interesting game mechanics. Like, now we can start to use items to manage our health and manage diseases and treat injuries, making it a little bit more interesting than just having a health pack or, you know, a healing potion. So that about does it for today's video. Still working on quite a few systems. I'm actually starting to talk to a few people to help out with some of the other elements of the game, namely audio, a little bit more programming, UI and VFX stuff. So we might actually start to see some even more rapid development in the coming months. Hopefully got some more concept art coming on from Ashley soon, and yeah, we'll start to explore things like how roles work, how managing jobs work, and basically getting your crew to start doing useful things around the ship instead of just taking up your resources. So yeah, there's still quite a lot on the roadmap, and looking forward to showing it all. So talk to you guys soon, and have a good one.